She stepped into the studio wearing a leg brace, the lasting mark of childhood polio. Yet what viewers noticed first was not her limitation, but the unmistakable light in her face. Myrna Horowitz didn't spin the fastest or dazzle with complex steps, but whenever the camera swept across the bandstand floor, her presence drew the eye. She danced not to impress, but to belong, and that simple act made her unforgettable. In the charged atmosphere of Studio B, surrounded by teenagers chasing their 15 minutes of fame, Myrna carried herself with quiet confidence. The music of the late 1950s pulsed through the room, but what set her apart was not glamour or competition. It was resilience. For audiences watching from living rooms across America, she became more than just another dancer. She became a reminder that joy could outshine any obstacle. Her story is one of paradox. She was never crowned a teen idol, yet she inspired countless viewers. She wasn't the star of every magazine cover, but she embodied the heart of the show. And then, as quickly as she arrived, she stepped away, leaving behind questions and memories that linger to this day. This is the journey we'll take together. From her childhood in Philadelphia to her moments on national television, through her choices beyond the spotlight, and finally to the legacy she left behind. The story of Myrna Horowitz still deserves to be told. Myrna Horowitz was born on February 25, 1942, and grew up in the close-knit neighborhoods of West Philadelphia. In those years, the city was alive with the hum of factories, the chatter of street markets, and the promise of upward mobility for working-class families. For many teenagers, Philadelphia was the backdrop of jukebox dreams and corner store friendships. For Myrna, it was also the place where she first learned what resilience meant. At the age of 7, her life was interrupted by polio, a disease that left her with lasting weakness in one leg. The brace she wore became a constant companion, yet it never defined her spirit. Teachers and classmates at West Philadelphia High remembered her not as the girl with polio, but as the one who laughed easily, encouraged others, and refused to sit on the sidelines. The physical challenges were real, but her determination was strong. Her home life nurtured that spirit. The Horowitz family valued education, hard work, and the small joys of daily living. Evenings often carried the sound of records spinning, doo-wop harmonies, Elvis Presley's rockabilly hits, and the early strains of rhythm and blues. Myrna loved to sway to the music, practicing steps in the living room, sometimes holding onto furniture as if it were a dance partner. Her parents, protective but supportive, worried about her health yet admired her drive. These early years gave her more than just a love for music. They gave her the habit of persistence. She was not dreaming of television stardom then, only of finding a way to dance despite her limitations, to join the culture that was sweeping her generation. That ordinary childhood, shaped by both adversity and joy, was about to intersect with something extraordinary. The next step would take her from her family's living room to a stage watched by millions. For Myrna Horowitz, American Bandstand wasn't just a television show. It was a doorway into a world she had only dreamed of. The opportunity arrived in 1957 when her friend Harvey Robbins encouraged her to come along to Studio B. On that day, the streets outside the studio were buzzing with teenagers, some clutching notebooks for autographs, others humming the latest rock and roll hits. The air carried the energy of a movement larger than any one person, and Myrna found herself caught up in it. As she joined the long line waiting to enter, the sounds of music drifted through the open doors. It wasn't just noise. It was an invitation. For someone who had spent years proving that she could dance in spite of polio, the possibility of stepping onto that famous floor was both daunting and exhilarating. She didn't know if the cameras would ever find her, but she wanted to be part of it. The first time Myrna stepped into Studio B was unforgettable. Bright lights washed over the dance floor, cameras rolled on heavy tracks, and the pulse of a live broadcast added an electricity that no rehearsal could capture. Around her, teens twirled, laughed, and tried to catch the camera's gaze. Myrna's heart pounded, yet she smiled and moved to the rhythm. In that moment, she wasn't defined by her brace or her past. She was simply a teenager dancing on national television. Viewers at home may not have known her name at first, but they noticed the girl whose presence carried quiet strength. Unlike the show's breakout stars, she didn't dominate the spotlight, but she added a note of sincerity that struck a chord with audiences. That first dance was not just an introduction to the stage, it was the beginning of her place in America's living rooms, a reminder that authenticity could be just as powerful as perfection. As the weeks went by, Myrna Horowitz became a familiar face on American Bandstand. She didn't dazzle with technical skill or flashy moves, but she carried a warmth that radiated through the black and white screens. While some dancers competed fiercely for the spotlight, Myrna's appeal was different. She represented the ordinary teenager who simply loved music and refused to let obstacles silence her joy. That authenticity made her unforgettable. Television was rapidly transforming the way America saw itself. Families tuned in after school to catch the latest dances, hairstyles, and teen idols. Amid the stars who would go on to grace magazine covers and inspire fan clubs, Myrna offered something else. She was approachable, relatable, the kind of girl viewers felt they might know from their own neighborhoods. Letters soon arrived at the studio praising the girl who danced with such heart, proof that her quiet presence had touched strangers across the country. Her appearance was modest, yet distinctive. Simple skirts, button-down blouses, and a ready smile. In an age when fashion and performance often set teens apart, Myrna's style made her seem like a trusted friend who had stepped into the limelight almost by accident. For countless viewers, she became a symbol that being genuine mattered just as much as being glamorous. Photographs from the era capture her mid-step, eyes alight, often surrounded by fellow dancers who seemed to draw strength from her optimism. Even if her name wasn't always headlined in teen magazines, her image lived on in the collective memory of those who grew up with Bandstand. She proved that television didn't just celebrate stars, it also celebrated spirit. For Myrna, those years marked her most visible moment in the public eye, and they shaped how generations would remember her. But as her presence on Bandstand grew, so too did the complexities behind the scenes, leading her toward a different kind of chapter. On American Bandstand, some dancers became icons through the magic of partnerships. Names like Justine and Bob or Arlene and Kenny filled fan magazines and sparked endless chatter. Myrna Horowitz, however, carved a different path. Without a fixed partner, she often danced with different boys or joined in group numbers, yet her independence made her stand out. She wasn't framed by one pairing, she was remembered for her own presence. Still, there were moments when partnerships added color to her story. Harvey Robbins, a friend who had first brought her to Studio B, sometimes joined her on the dance floor. Their interactions were more about camaraderie than polished choreography, but that natural ease resonated with audiences. Viewers saw in them a reminder that Bandstand wasn't only about flawless couples, it was about teenagers sharing music and friendship under the bright studio lights. Behind the cameras, Myrna earned the affection of her peers. She was known for her kindness, for steadying nerves when others felt the pressure of performing live. She also became a quiet defender of Dick Clark, supporting him during times when the show or its host came under criticism. That loyalty did not go unnoticed. In 1970, during Bandstand's anniversary celebration, Clark interviewed Myrna on air, recognizing her as part of the show's enduring spirit. Her contribution also stretched into the music world itself.
I noticed as
Freddie
I looked
Cannon,
around,
one of Bandstand's most frequent performers, later acknowledged that Myrna helped promote his songs, a small but telling example of her impact off the floor. Though she never had the fan clubs or magazine spreads of the show's brightest stars, she was deeply respected by those within the Bandstand family. For Myrna, these behind-the-scenes moments defined her as much as her on-screen appearances. She may not have been celebrated as a teen idol, but she embodied the values of loyalty, friendship, and quiet strength, qualities that made her presence unforgettable. By the early 1960s, American Bandstand was evolving, and so was Myrna Horowitz's life. The show, once rooted firmly in Philadelphia, began to expand in scope and polish. New dancers arrived, fashion trends shifted rapidly, and the pace of youth culture quickened. For someone like Myrna, whose appeal rested in her authenticity rather than perfection, the pressure to keep up with the whirlwind began to weigh heavily. School and everyday responsibilities soon clashed with the demanding schedule of being a Bandstand regular. Myrna had always balanced her health with determination, but the long hours and constant expectation of appearing flawless took a toll. She gradually began to step back from the floor, her appearances becoming less frequent. Viewers noticed her absence, and for many, it marked the beginning of a quieter chapter. There was also the emotional weight of recognition. While others basked in fan clubs, press attention, and the glamour of being teen idols, Myrna often reflected on what her own visibility meant. She wasn't celebrated for dazzling dance routines. She was admired for her perseverance. Although that admiration was genuine, it also left her wondering if she truly belonged in an environment that prized image above all else. In time, Myrna made the choice to leave the program. It was not a defeat, but a deliberate step toward stability. She wanted to pursue her studies, find meaningful work, and live beyond the confines of television lights. Fans who learned of her departure felt both surprise and respect. Many wrote letters of thanks, expressing how much her courage had inspired them. Her decision was a turning point, the end of one spotlight but the beginning of another kind of journey. Fame had faded, but life was waiting, and Myrna was ready to embrace it. When the music of Bandstand faded from her daily routine, Myrna Horowitz turned to a quieter, steadier rhythm. She enrolled in secretarial studies at a community college tied to Temple University, focusing on building a practical career. This decision reflected the same realism that had guided her on the dance floor. She knew life would demand responsibility more than applause. Her first job brought her to Swan Records, a Philadelphia label at the heart of the city's rock and roll boom. Though she was no longer in front of the cameras, she remained close to the music world she loved. Later, she worked within local government, a position that required diligence and composure, qualities that colleagues remembered her for. Even outside of show business, she carried the same resilience that once made her shine on Bandstand. Writing also became a thread in her story. Myrna contributed articles to Teen magazine, giving readers a candid glimpse into the life of a teenager who had danced under the nation's gaze. Through her words, she allowed others to see the mixture of excitement and discipline behind the glamour. For fans, these writings were treasured, an authentic voice from someone who had lived the experience they only imagined. Her personal life was kept mostly out of the spotlight. Accounts suggest she spent time in California before eventually returning east. Friends and fans later recalled hearing of her passing around 2009, though details remain scarce. What is clear is that Myrna lived with the same quiet dignity that had defined her television years, carrying forward a spirit of kindness and perseverance. Though she left the cameras behind, her life after Bandstand revealed that courage was not confined to a studio. It was something she carried into every chapter that followed. Myrna Horowitz's story endures not because she was the most glamorous dancer on American Bandstand, but because she was real. She faced childhood polio, wore a brace, and still stepped into the nation's living rooms with a smile that lit up the screen. Her courage showed viewers that joy did not belong only to the flawless, it belonged to anyone willing to embrace the music. In a show remembered for its icons, she became a symbol of resilience, modesty, and quiet strength. Bandstand was more than a television program. It was a shared ritual for millions of families, a mirror of youth culture in post-war America. Within that tapestry, Myrna's presence was a reminder that authenticity mattered just as much as style. She was the girl next door who proved that determination could earn its own spotlight. For those who remember, her legacy lives on. Were you one of the viewers who saw her dance across the floor, defying the limits polio had placed on her? Do you recall the afternoons when Bandstand filled your home with music, laughter, and the unforgettable faces of teenagers like Myrna? If these memories touched your heart, we invite you to stay with us here on American Bandstand Memories. Subscribe to our channel so you won't miss the next journey into the lives, the music, and the moments that shaped a generation. Myrna Horowitz may be gone, but her spirit still dances, in the memory of those who saw her, and perhaps in your own.